Get comfortable. Let your breathing slow. Bloodborne is one of the most densely layered games From Software has ever made. Its horror is not merely aesthetic, it is architectural. Every item description, every NPC line, every enemy placement is a piece of a cosmology that most players experience only as surface. The beast plague, the blood, the nightmare, the things in the sky that everyone can see but no one is allowed to acknowledge. Today, we go underneath all of it. Here are 100 unusual facts about Bloodborne, ranging from things you may have suspected to things that will change how you see every moment of the game. Let us begin. Fact 1. The Amygdalae. The enormous spider-limbed creatures clinging to the walls of Cathedral Ward are visible throughout the entire game, but most players never consciously see them until their insight is high enough to trigger the game flagging them as present. The Amygdalae are not hidden. They are enormous. They are on the sides of buildings, wrapped around towers, crouching on rooftops. A player walking through Cathedral Ward in the early game is physically in the presence of creatures the size of buildings, and the game simply does not acknowledge them. No NPC comments on them. No enemy reacts to them. The environmental music does not change. At a certain insight threshold, the game's measure of how much cosmic truth the hunter has absorbed, the Amygdalae become interactable. They were always there. You simply could not perceive them until your mind had been opened enough to register what was in front of you. This is not a game mechanic. It is a lore statement. The Amygdalae exist in a state that ordinary human perception cannot process. Insight is what changes your perception, not the world. The specific horror of this is that it is not presented as a revelation. The game does not announce that you can now see them. You just look up one day and they are there, exactly where they have always been, enormous and patient, and you understand that they were always watching. Fact 2. Oiden, the only Great One referred to with a male pronoun, has no physical body. He exists entirely as a voice and an influence. When you encounter Oiden Chapel, you are in a space dedicated to a god that is literally nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The Great Ones of Bloodborne all share a quality that distinguishes them from ordinary monsters. They exist at levels of reality that human bodies cannot fully access. But Oiden has transcended even what other Great Ones possess. His name appears in numerous item descriptions: Formless Oiden, the Oiden Writhe Rune, the Oiden Tomb, where Gehrman is encountered in the nightmare, always associated with formlessness, with the absence of physical form, with the specific power that comes from existing as pure influence rather than as a body that can be found and confronted. He is also the only Great One in the game who is never a boss encounter. You cannot fight Oiden. There is nothing to fight. He is the wind moving through the space between everything else. His specific power, according to the item descriptions, relates to blood echoes and the accumulation of souls, or specifically to the fact that Oiden, being formless, unconsciously draws in the echoes and vitality of those who seek contact with him. The chapel dweller and various seekers of Oiden are not simply worshippers. They are vessels for an accumulation they cannot fully understand, collecting what their god attracts without being able to hold it. Fact 3. Every Great One in Bloodborne has lost a child. And this shared grief is the central cosmological fact of the entire universe. This is stated directly in the item description of the 1/3 of umbilical cord. Every great one loses his child, and will seek a surrogate to replace what was lost. This is not backstory. It is the engine of the plot. Had the moon presence created the hunter's dream and the cycle of hunting to find someone capable of becoming its surrogate child. The wet nurse attended to Murgo because Murgo was a child, the child of Queen Yharnam and Urden, a being whose existence was unusual precisely because Great One children are not supposed to survive. The Orphan of Kos is literally an unborn child, ripped from Kos's corpse by Byrgenwerth scholars, who fights from within a nightmare because it never got the chance to be born into the world properly. The grief of the Great Ones is not background texture. It is the specific reason that humans in Bloodborne suffer. The rituals, the blood ministration, and the nightmare. All of it is ultimately the consequence of cosmic beings who have lost something irreplaceable and are using human civilization as the mechanism for their grief. Fact 4. Pale blood. The mysterious substance the hunter is explicitly told to seek at the start of the game, which is never directly explained, is almost certainly the blood of the moon presence itself. The note at Iosefka's clinic reads, "Seek pale blood to transcend the hunt." Pale blood is referenced in several other places, always associated with the pale moon, with transcendence, with what lies beyond the ordinary cycle of blood and beast, and the moon presence is associated with pale light, with the blood moon, with the specific color and quality of what it means to exist beyond the ordinary. The theory supported by most careful readings of the lore is that pale blood is either the moon presence's own blood or the blood type that allows communion with it. The specific blood quality that makes the hunter a candidate for becoming the moon presence's surrogate child rather than simply another victim of the blood plague. The hunter came to Yharnam seeking pale blood. Whether they knew what they were seeking is unclear. What is clear is that whatever drew them, there was not random. Fact 5. The hunter's dream is not a neutral safe space. It is a prison designed by the moon presence, and Gehrman has been trapped in it for longer than anyone can accurately calculate. The hunter's dream feels like a refuge, a quiet garden, a workshop, a place where you can upgrade your weapons and speak to the doll and recover from whatever just killed you. This is the presentation. The reality, revealed through Gehrman's dialogue and the game's eventual confrontation with him, is darker. Gehrman was the first hunter. He made contact with the moon presence. How exactly is left ambiguous, but the moon presence created the hunter's dream in a form that reflected Gehrman's hopes and desires, as all nightmare spaces in Bloodborne reflect the psyche of whoever anchors them. And then he was trapped in it, not violently, not against a resistance he could articulate, simply unable to leave. The dream was comfortable. The purpose it gave him was real. The trap was so well designed that it took an enormous span of time before Gehrman understood his own captivity. By the time of the game, he is wheelchair-bound, ancient beyond ordinary reckoning, still maintaining the dream's operations, still providing guidance to new hunters who pass through. He offers to release you at the end. His offer is genuine. He has been unable to release himself, but he can release you. And his sadness about this, his weariness, is one of the most affecting things in any From Software game. Fact 6. The doll in the hunter's dream is a constructed being. Gehrman made her in the image of someone he loved, and the moon presence gave her a soul. The plain doll, the quiet woman who levels you up and speaks to you in the dream, is not a natural being. She is a doll that Gehrman built, constructed to resemble someone who was important to him. Maria, the hunter of hunters who guards the clock tower in the old Hunters DLC, is the person whose image the doll was modelled on. A hunter of extraordinary capability who was also Gehrman's student, and, in ways the game handles with delicacy, someone he cared for deeply. The moon presence animated the doll, gave her something like a soul, not out of generosity to Gehrman, but as part of the dream's design. A being that Gehrman loved, present in his prison, available to speak to and to maintain emotional connection with, was another mechanism of the trap. You cannot hate a prison that contains the things you love. The doll herself is aware of her nature. Her dialogue acknowledges the strangeness of her existence. She knows she was made, she knows what she is, and she accepts it with a gentleness that the game does not undercut. She is not tragic because she is constructed. She is gentle because gentleness is what she chose to be, within the constraints of what she is. Fact 7. The city of Yharnam was named after a Pthumerian queen, and that queen still exists in the game as a ghost, standing outside the room where her child was taken. Queen Yharnam of Pthumeria is seen twice in the main game, and once explicitly at the end of a Chalice dungeon questline. She appears as a spectral figure in white, heavily pregnant in her first appearances, standing in locations associated with blood and sacrifice. She was the Pthumerian queen who bore Murgo, the child fathered by Uden, the formless Great One, and who apparently died in or shortly after childbirth, her body buried in the Pthumerian labyrinths, while her spirit persists in the spaces between the world and the nightmare, and her ghost stands outside the wet nurse arena. She is watching still from wherever she persists, the space where her child is kept. Murgo is not with her. Murgo is in the nightmare. The wet nurse tends to the child, and the mother stands outside, unable to reach what she lost, unable to stop watching. Fact 8. Rom the vacuous spider, the boss whose death triggers the blood moon's descent, is not an enemy in the conventional sense. She was a human scholar who was elevated to Great One status, and her specific function is to maintain a veil of ignorance over Yharnam. Rom's title is the vacuous spider. Vacuous meaning empty, vacant, devoid of intelligence. This seems odd for a Great One. Great Ones are described as beings of cosmic intelligence. Why would one be specifically characterized as empty? Because Rom's function is to prevent people from seeing. The veil that hides the truth of what is happening in Yharnam, the blood moon that has already risen in the nightmare but has not yet descended into the waking world, is maintained by Rom. She keeps the nightmare's reality from bleeding into the physical world. When you kill her, you are not simply defeating a boss. You are removing the filter between the world as ordinary people perceive it and the world as it actually is. Rom was a Byrgenwerth scholar who ascended to Great One status through contact with Kos, one of only a small number of humans to achieve this transformation. Her ascension required her to become something that could hold back the truth rather than seeking it, which is the opposite of what Byrgenwerth was built for. There is something in this about the cost of genuine understanding. The person who truly sees what is there becomes the thing that prevents others from seeing it too quickly. Fact 9. The blood healing that the healing church provides is not miraculous medicine. It is blood from the Great Ones, specifically from the old blood found in the Pthumerian labyrinths, and it has been slowly transforming Yharnam's population for generations. The healing church's blood ministration is the central institution of Yharnam's society. People come from across the world to receive blood treatment for illness, injury, age. The church's reputation is built on genuine results. The blood does heal. The blood does extend life. The blood produces real benefits that ordinary medicine cannot produce. The blood is also slowly making the people of Yharnam more beast-like. The old blood, the blood of the Great Ones, found in the Pthumerian labyrinths by Byrgenwerth scholars generations ago, carries the specific quality of Great One biology. When ingested in small quantities over time, it changes the people who receive it. It makes them susceptible to the beast plague. It makes them capable of transformations that normal human biology cannot produce. It makes Yharnam, over generations, into a population that is no longer entirely human. The church knew this. At some level, the church has always known this. The hunt exists specifically because the church needed a mechanism to manage the population it was gradually transforming. Fact 10. There is a second church that predates the healing church by a significant period. The choir, a secret upper echelon of the healing church that made contact with Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos, and whose specific research involved the cosmos rather than the blood. The choir is not mentioned in the main game's surface narrative. They are revealed through item descriptions and the specific geography of the orphanage and upper cathedral ward. While the main healing church focused on blood ministration and the management of the beast plague, the choir had been in contact with Ebrietas, a great one who was found abandoned in the Es Chalice dungeon, an orphan of the cosmos who the choir both studied and attempted to commune with. The choir's research was not the blood ministry that sustained the city. It was the attempt to reach the cosmos directly, to understand what the Great Ones were pointing at when they pointed at the stars, to access whatever lay beyond the moon and the nightmare. They used Ebrietas as their connection point, learning from her what the blood alone could not teach. The orphanage was where they kept the most promising of their candidates, people whose eyes had been sufficiently opened to potentially receive what Ebrietas could offer. What happened to those candidates is visible in the upper cathedral ward, which is populated by the remains of experiments that did not go as planned. Fact 11. Insight, the game's measure of accumulated cosmic knowledge, is a literal physical change in the hunter's perception, and the things it reveals are not hallucinations. When the insight meter fills and certain thresholds are crossed, new things appear in the game world. The Amygdalae on the cathedral walls, the celestial mobs that appear after certain events, the baby crying in the Hypogean jail. These are not the hunter going mad. They are the hunter developing the ability to perceive what was always present The game makes this explicit through the Carol rune for insight itself, which describes the rune as meaning "I within," and explains that the symbol represents the very basics of what Byrgenwerth had been seeking. The eyes inside, the additional perception, the seeing beyond the visible, and Byrgenwerth scholars who advanced in their research developed more literal eyes. The celestial mobs and the various scholars corrupted by excessive knowledge show what happens when the physical body tries to accommodate the extra perception that insight produces. The horror is not that insight produces hallucinations. The horror is that insight reveals truth. The things you see at high insight are real. The amygdalae are there. The baby is crying. The world is genuinely more terrible than ordinary human perception is designed to process. And insight is simply what lets you perceive that genuine terrible truth. Fact 12. The Great Ones are associated with specific anatomical structures of the human brain. And this is deliberate design by From Software. What the moon presence is associated with the cerebrovascular system. Specifically, its signature attack that drops the hunter's health to one mimics a catastrophic disruption of blood supply to the brain. The brain of Mensis, the enormous exposed brain encountered in the nightmare, corresponds to the limbic system. The amygdala is explicitly named after the amygdala, the brain structure associated with fear response and emotional processing. This is consistent and intentional. The Great Ones in Bloodborne are not simply cosmic monsters. They are the game's representation of what the human nervous system encounters when it attempts to process experiences it was not designed to process. Each Great One corresponds to the aspect of human consciousness that it most directly threatens or engages. Insight, the game's measure of exposure to the Great Ones, is the literal expansion of consciousness to accommodate what the ordinary brain cannot hold. The nightmare is not simply a supernatural realm. It is the specific experience of a mind trying to contain what it has seen. Fact 13. The hunter you play has been in Yharnam before. The note at Yosefka's clinic, in your handwriting, proves this. When you first arrive at Yosefka's clinic and read the note directing you to seek pale blood, the handwriting is yours. This is not a coincidence or a game design shortcut. It is a specific lore detail. The hunter has been through the cycle before. They have arrived at the Yosefka's clinic before, entered into the blood ministration process before. I'd signed the contract before. And the note they left for themselves is the evidence that they have been here enough times to know what they need to tell their next iteration. The cycle of hunting, dying, returning through the hunter's dream. This is not the hunter's first experience of it. They have been circling this same night for longer than they can consciously remember. The note is the only fragment of self-knowledge that persists through the cycle, because it was written in a physical space rather than existing in the hunter's memory. Sleep well. The facts continue. There is much more in the dark. Fact 14. The entire catastrophe of Bloodborne, the Beast Plague, the Healing Church, the Nightmare, everything, traces back to a single decision made by Byrgenwerth scholars at a small fishing village on a remote coast. Byrgenwerth was not always what it became. It began as a place of genuine scholarship, an institution dedicated to understanding the Pthumerian labyrinths beneath the earth. and the ancient civilizations they contained. The scholars were intellectually serious people with a coherent philosophical project to understand what the Great Ones were and to find a means by which humanity could elevate itself to something closer to their level. The specific moment that changed everything was when word reached Byrgenwerth that a Great One had washed ashore at a small fishing hamlet on the coast. Not a living Great One. Kos was already dead when the scholars arrived, but her body was present, and her unborn child was within her, and the villagers of the hamlet had been transformed by their proximity to her remains into something part human and part aquatic. And the scholars had Gehrman and his hunters as protection. And they decided to take what they could find. What followed was a massacre. The villagers were killed, experimented on, their skulls opened and their brains examined for the eyes on the inside that Provost Willem had spent his career seeking. Kos's body was dissected. The Orphan of Kos, the unborn child within her, was removed, and its umbilical cord was taken for Byrgenwerth's research. The surviving villagers of the fishing hamlet cursed the hunters and the scholars in terms that the game makes permanent. Each wretched birth would plunge each child into a lifetime of misery. The pungence of Kos would cling, like a mother's devotion. The hunter's nightmare was born from this curse. Everything that follows in the game's history, Lawrence founding the healing church, the blood ministration spreading through Yharnam, the beast plague, the night of the hunt, has this single act of scholarly violence at its foundation. Fact 15. Lady Maria threw her weapon down a well after the fishing hamlet massacre because she could not reconcile what she had done with what she believed herself to be. Maria was a hunter of extraordinary capability. Arguably, the most skilled individual combatant in Bloodborne's world, and which is evident even in her boss fight, where she fights using techniques that most hunters never approach. She was Gehrman's student, and, in the gentle implication the game maintains, someone he cared for deeply beyond the teacher-student relationship. She was also at the fishing hamlet. She participated in what happened there. And when it was over, she took her weapon, the rakuyo, the paired blade that has been her primary instrument throughout her career as a hunter, and dropped it down the well in the hamlet. Not lost, not stolen. Deliberately placed in a location where she could not easily retrieve it, as a statement that she was done. She then spent the rest of her life doing something very different from what hunters do. She cared for the patients in the research hall and the failed experiments of the Healing Church's ascension programs. People whose minds had been broken by procedures they did not fully consent to. She could not undo the massacre. She could tend to its other victims. When the hunter's nightmare pulled her into it, the curse on all hunters claimed her along with the rest. She became the guardian of the astral clock tower. Her purpose in the nightmare is to prevent anyone from reaching the fishing hamlet and discovering what was done there. She is guarding a secret that she participated in creating. She is also, in the specific way of a person who cannot forgive themselves, ensuring that no one else replicates what she could not stop the first time. Fact 16. The sound of the Orphan of Kos crying during its introduction is the same audio file as Gehrman's crying, pitched lower. And this detail, discovered by players examining the game files, is one of the most devastating pieces of lore delivery in the entire series. The Orphan of Kos is the thing that Byrgenwerth took from a dead mother. The child ripped from Kos's body, its umbilical cord stolen, its existence in the physical world denied. It lives in the nightmare because it was never born properly into the world. And when it emerges from Kos's body in the nightmare, it cries with Gehrman's voice. The connection this implies. Gehrman is the hunter's dream's anchor, as Amygdalae is the nightmare of Mensis's anchor. The curse on the hunters, the curse placed by the dying survivors of the fishing hamlet, bound Gehrman specifically, and by extension all hunters who came after him. The Orphan of Kos's cry using Gehrman's audio is the game's way of stating that the connection between the first hunter and the unborn child he helped rob is not metaphorical. It is literal. Gehrman has been crying the same cry for as long as the nightmare has existed. When you kill the Orphan of Kos, the doll comments that Gehrman has started sleeping more peacefully for the first time in a long time. Fact 17. Provost Willem. The elderly figure sitting motionless in a chair at Byrgenwerth, gesturing mutely toward the moon when the hunter approaches, underwent his own transformation in pursuit of the eyes on the inside. Willem spent his career believing that humanity's elevation required literal additional perception, that the eyes on the inside he sought were physical structures, and that the brain could be modified to accommodate a higher form of seeing. By the time you find him, he has achieved something, though not what he intended. He sits in his chair. He cannot speak. He points at the moon. The chairs of Byrgenwerth are specific. Several of the scholars have ended in similar states, their transformations having progressed to the point where ordinary human function is no longer possible. Willem's particular fate is to have arrived at some form of insight so expanded that the gap between it and ordinary communication has become unbridgeable. He knows things. He cannot share them. He points at the moon because the moon, and what the moon represents, is the closest he can come to explaining what he found. His specific philosophy, eyes on the inside, insight as physical modification, at the literal accumulation of additional perceptual organs, is the precursor to everything the game depicts. The celestial mobs, with their faces full of eyes, are the physical end state of the process he began. Whether this terrified him or vindicated him is not something he can tell you anymore. Fact 18. Lawrence, the founder of the Healing Church and the being you fight in the Old Hunters DLC, as a skull that spawns a body made of lava, had a skull on display in Byrgenwerth that he left there deliberately when he departed to found the church. Lawrence's skull sits in the Grand Cathedral in the nightmare version of Yharnam, separate from the Lawrence boss fight, which takes place in the waking Grand Cathedral. The skull exists in both spaces. The implications of this have been discussed extensively by the game's community, and with the most coherent reading being that Lawrence left the skull at Byrgenwerth as either a statement about what he was leaving behind, or as an anchor of some kind, or as a reminder to Willem of their disagreement. Lawrence and Willem disagreed fundamentally about the method of human ascension. Willem believed insight and physical modification were the path. Lawrence believed the old blood was the path. They split over this disagreement, and Lawrence took most of the scholars with him to found what became the Healing Church. The skull that remains at Byrgenwerth is the residue of that departure. Something of Lawrence left in the place where he became who he was, before he became what the church made him. In the nightmare, Lawrence's boss form is a beast cleric, a thing of fire and lava, and the specific transformation of a person who spent their life distributing blood and fire to others. He is what he made of the world made back into him. Fact 19. The Healing Church's blood ministration was not simply the old blood from the Pythagorean labyrinth. It was, according to the most supported reading of the law, the blood of Ebrietas, the abandoned daughter of the cosmos found in the Is Chalice dungeon. Ebrietas is a great one, who was found abandoned in the deepest levels of the Pythagorean labyrinths. Unlike other great ones, she did not flee from human contact. She had been left behind by whatever process had taken the other great ones beyond human reach, and the scholars who found her were able to establish contact with her and study her directly. And the choir, the uppermost echelon of the Healing Church, used Ebrietas as their primary research subject and, in the specific intimacy that the law implies, as something close to a partner in their investigations. Her blood became the basis for the most potent blood ministration. The healing properties were real. The transformative consequences were also real. Yharnam was being changed by Ebrietas's blood at the cellular level, generation by generation, and the choir knew this and considered it a positive development toward eventual ascension. Ebrietas herself is encountered in the upper cathedral ward, in a space that contains her at one end and the aftermath of the choir's patient experiments at the other. She does not attack when you enter her chamber. She is prostrating herself in apparent grief, a great one bowing before something the player cannot see, mourning something the player cannot identify. When you attack her, she responds, but her initial posture is not threatening. It is mournful. Fact 20. Master Willem's phrase, "Fear the old blood," is not a warning about the blood plague. It is a warning about what the blood will eventually do to the people who use it. When Lawrence departed Byrgenwerth to found the Healing Church, Willem's final word to him was this phrase. Most players encountering it early in the game interpret it as Willem having foreseen the beast plague, the physical transformation into monsters that blood ministration eventually produces. This is partially correct, but misses the more specific thing Willem understood. Willem had seen what happened to the fishing hamlet villagers. He had seen what proximity to Great One remains did to human physiology. He understood that the transformation was not random. It was directed by the specific nature of whatever Great One blood was being distributed. The blood was not simply medicine that had a bad side effect. It was the means by which Great One influence entered human civilization, reshaped it, and produced the specific conditions that the Great Ones, or some of them, needed. Fearing the old blood meant understanding that accepting it was accepting a relationship whose terms you could not fully read, with beings whose purposes were not fully comprehensible, in exchange for healing and power that came at a cost that would only become apparent generations later. Willem had decided the cost was too high. Lawrence had decided the cost was worth paying. They were both right about different things, Fact 21. The research hall patients, the transformed beings with elongated necks who reach constantly upward in the Old Hunters DLC, are attempting to grow eyes in their own brains. The research hall was the Healing Church's early facility for the Ascension experiments. The attempts to accelerate in individual patients the process that the choir believed blood ministration would eventually produce in the general population. The patients there were given increasingly concentrated blood treatments and subjected to procedures whose specific nature is described only obliquely in the item descriptions and the environment. The elongated necks reaching upward, the grasping hands, the specific posture of reaching for something above and beyond. This is not simply a physical deformity from the experiments. It is the physical expression of what the experiments induced. The patients who received the treatments felt genuinely that something was growing inside their heads that needed more space, that the ceiling was a limit on a process that was trying to go further. Some of them succeeded in the specific way that Bloodborne defines success. The celestial mob, the transformed figure that drops a bloodstone chunk, is what a research hall patient looks like after the process completes. Whether this was what the patients wanted, or what the church told them they were becoming, is a question the game leaves open in the specific way that makes it most disturbing. Fact 22. Ludwig the Accursed, the enormous beast that begins the Old Hunters DLC as an apparently mindless monster, was the most celebrated and accomplished hunter of the Healing Church's era, and his fall is the specific tragedy that the first section of the DLC is processing. Ludwig was everything the Healing Church wanted its hunters to be: powerful, disciplined, capable of organizing and inspiring others, genuinely dedicated to protecting the people of Yharnam. He founded the Healing Church Hunter system, the formal, institutionalized version of hunting that replaced Gehrman's more informal Old Hunters. He wielded the Holy Moonlight Sword, a weapon so associated with his legend that its item description reads like a eulogy, where when the hunter's nightmare claimed him, the curse on all hunters eventually claiming even its greatest, Ludwig fell into the blood-drunk state that the nightmare specifically produces. The enormous beast at the beginning of the DLC, so far gone that it can only scream and attack, is Ludwig after the nightmare has done to him what the nightmare does, but he is not entirely gone. When you defeat his beast form and he lies dying, a fragment of what he was resurfaces. He asks if there are other hunters in his image out there still. He asks if his ideals persist. He has a moment of himself before the end. And whether you choose to tell him the truth about what the church became, or give him the gentle lie, is one of the most affecting player choices in the game. Fact 23. The Cainhurst Vilebloods, the vampire-like aristocrats of Cainhurst Castle, are not simply evil. They are the result of a single act of betrayal by an unnamed Byrgenwerth scholar. Cainhurst Castle is presented as a place of decadent evil. The architecture, the enemies, the specific aesthetic of blood-drinking aristocrats who persisted in isolated excess while Yharnam burned. But the origin of the Vilebloods is more specific and more interesting than simple corruption. An unnamed Byrgenwerth scholar secretly took forbidden blood, not the old blood from the Pythagorean labyrinths, but a different blood from a source the game does not explicitly identify, and brought it to Cainhurst. Queen Annalise drank it and became the first vile blood, a being of complete immortality, unable to truly die, and sustained by a blood type that grants a specific form of existence that is neither the beast transformation of the Healing Church's path, nor the insight-seeking of Byrgenwerth's. The vile bloods have been collecting blood dregs, the residue of violence and death in blood, because Annalise believes they are the means by which she can conceive a child of blood. She is doing the same thing the school of Mensis did, reaching for a Great One's child through a specific blood ritual, just with a different method. The executioners of the Healing Church hunt the vile blood specifically because Annalise's immortality and her blood type are considered threats to the Church's monopoly on both healing and ascension. Fact 24. The choir's experiments in the Upper Cathedral ward were not failures in the way the game's environment implies. They were producing the results the choir intended. They simply could not control what the results needed to do next. The celestial mobs in the Upper Cathedral ward are the end state of the choir's ascension experiments. Beings who successfully grew eyes on the inside, whose brains were modified enough to receive what Ebrietas was offering, who reached a form of insight that took them beyond ordinary human function. They are hostile to the hunter. This reads, on first encounter, as the experiments having gone wrong, as madness or corruption having claimed the subjects. But the more specific reading, supported by the item descriptions of the choir items and the celestial mob drops, is that the transformed subjects are not mad. They are simply no longer human in the ways that make them interested in human interaction, and they have received what they sought. The hunter is not something they recognize as significant. The failure of the choir's project was not in producing the transformation. It was in not having a plan for what came after, for what transformed beings did with their transformation, for how they related to the world they no longer fully inhabited. Fact 25. Simon the Harrowed, the bow-wielding hunter you meet in the Old Hunters DLC, came to Yharnam specifically to document the truth about the Healing Church and what it had done. He never intended to survive. Simon is an outsider, not a Yharnam native, not a church hunter, not a product of the systems the game depicts. He came to understand what the church was, and he understood that the truth he was carrying was more important than the one person carrying it. He gives you his weapon, the bow blade, near the end of his quest line, as a passing on rather than a gift. He is not expecting to use it again. His specific role in the DLC is to serve as the voice of historical documentation. He is the one who tells you what the fishing hamlet massacre means, who explains the curse on the hunters in terms that make the Orphan of Kos fight something other than simply a boss encounter. Without Simon, the player has the events. With Simon, the player has the context that makes those events comprehensible as tragedy, rather than simply as obstacle. He is, in the end, a historian who accepted that he would not outlive his research. The Bloodborne universe is full of beings who chose to enter spaces that would consume them in service of something larger than their individual survival. Simon is the one who chose to do this for the sake of understanding rather than power. Fact 26. The hunter's nightmare is not simply a prison. It is structurally a specific recreation of the events that created the curse, and the hunters trapped within it are forced to relive the night of the fishing hamlet massacre in perpetual repetition. The nightmare's specific geography, the flooded, burning, blood-soaked version of Yharnam that leads eventually through the research hall and the astral clock tower to the fishing hamlet, is not random. It is the specific sequence of guilt. The hunters who are trapped there are the ones whose blood-drunk state represents the culmination of what the curse promised. That the pungence of Kos would cling to them, that each wretched birth would plunge each child into a lifetime of misery, and the nightmare is a closed loop of consequence. The hunters relive the night. They become more blood-drunk in the reliving. They become more fully what the nightmare makes of hunters who were already compromised by what they did. There is no escape that the nightmare itself provides. Only the hunter from outside, who can enter through the eye of a blood-drunk hunter item and move through it toward the Orphan of Kos. When the orphan is defeated, the nightmare dissolves. The curse is lifted, partially, imperfectly, in the specific, incomplete way that the game handles all its endings. But the hunters who have been trapped there for however long the nightmare has persisted are finally released. Whether this is justice or simply mercy is not a question the game answers. Fact 27. The Mensis cage that Micolash and his scholars wear on their heads was not designed for combat or intimidation. It was designed to trap thoughts at the moment of death, and it worked exactly as intended. The school of Mensis needed a way to send their consciousness into a nightmare realm while their bodies remained behind. The cage served this function. When a wearer died with the cage on their head, the physical brain ceased to function, but the thoughts, the accumulated insight, the active consciousness were captured by the cage's structure and sent forward into the nightmare dimension, rather than simply ending. The scholars who died during the Mensis ritual had their brains stillborn. The umbilical cord description says that the ritual resulted in the stillbirth of their brains. They did not achieve the nightmare consciousness they sought. Only Micolash survived the process with his mind intact, because his insight and his specific relationship to the nightmare space were sufficient to anchor him there as its host. The other scholars' bodies can be found in the unseen village, seated in their chairs, the cages on their heads, their physical forms mummified in the positions they died in, while their minds attempted the crossing that destroyed them. They are the failed version of what Micolash achieved, the specific cost of a ritual that required more than the participants possessed. Micolash himself is found at the center of a circle of these bodies in the unseen village. He is the one who made it through. Fact 28. Micolash's famous line. Kos, or some say Kosm, do you hear our prayers, is not a meaningless invocation. He is asking the dead Great One to grant him something specific, and he is doing it because he knows it worked once before. The specific grant Micolash is asking for is eyes. He shouts this while fleeing from the hunter through the nightmare of Mensis. Grant us eyes, grant us eyes. And the specific reference is to what happened to Rom. Rom was a Byrgenwerth scholar who ascended to Great One status through contact with Kos. The eyes that Kos granted, the literal physical modification of the brain that Willem had been seeking through other means, are what Rom received and what transformed him into something that could maintain the veil of ignorance over Yharnam. Mikolash wants the same thing. He is asking a dead Great One, whose corpse washed up on a fishing hamlet shore, whose unborn child was ripped from her body by the scholars of Byrgenwerth, to grant him the cosmic modification that she granted to Rom before the massacre that ended her physical presence in the world. Whether Kos hears him in the nightmare is not answered. What is answered is that Mikolash never achieves what he is asking for. He runs, he shouts, he dies when the hunter catches him. Whatever the dead Great One might have offered him remains unreceived. Fact 29. There are 4 umbilical cords in the game, but only 3 are needed for the secret ending. And the game never explicitly explains what consuming them does to the hunter, or why it allows the moon presence fight to occur. The umbilical cords are items described as artifacts originating with Great One pregnancies. Specifically, cords from pregnancies that ended in the way Great One pregnancies always end, with the loss of the child. Each cord carries the description: every Great One loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. When the hunter consumes 3 of them, something changes. The game does not announce what. The hunter does not comment. The specific physiological or metaphysical consequence of eating 3 pieces of Great One pregnancy artifacts is left to implication. The implication, supported by every other piece of lore about what the umbilical cords represent, is that the hunter has accepted the role of surrogate child to the moon presence. 3 cords from 3 lost pregnancies, consumed, mark the hunter as sufficiently connected to the Great One reproductive cycle to function as what the moon presence has been seeking through the entire existence of the hunter's dream. The dream was built to find this person. The umbilical cords are what confirm them. The moon presence, when it finally descends after Gehrman's defeat, is not attacking the hunter. It is attempting to claim what it has found. The hunter who has consumed the cords refuses that claim and fights back. The transformation in the true ending into the infant Great One is what the moon presence intended from the beginning, achieved in a way the moon presence did not control. Fact 30. The 3 endings of Bloodborne correspond to 3 different relationships to the dream, and only one of them involves waking up. The first ending, where you accept Gehrman's offer to be freed, produces the most ordinary conclusion. You wake up under the morning sun, outside the hunter's dream, released from the dream cycle. This is the ending where you go home. In whatever sense home exists for someone who came to Yharnam seeking pale blood, it is the most human ending. The ending that treats escape from the nightmare as the goal. The second ending, where you refuse Gehrman's offer and fight him, and he summons the moon presence, and you defeat the moon presence. This ending does not show you waking up. It shows you transforming. The hunter becomes an infant Great One, and the doll gently picks it up. She says that it has begun. Whatever the age of the Great Ones means, whatever it means for a transformed hunter to exist as a new Great One in the world, It begins here. You do not escape the dream. You transcend it. The third ending is achieved by refusing Gehrman's offer, but this time accepting his release without fighting, simply letting him put you to rest. The hunter wakes under the morning sun, but something is different in the specific quality of the light. This is considered by many to be the worst ending, not because of what happens, but because of what was possible. You were the one who could have fought the moon presence. You chose to simply leave. Fact 31. Murgo is not actually in the nightmare of Mensis as a physical presence. The crying you hear is a spiritual remnant. Murgo's body died at or shortly after birth, but its soul persists in the nightmare. The wet nurse's item description and several contextual clues make this clear. Murgo was born dead, or died immediately after birth, in the circumstances that involved Queen Yharnam and Odin's union. The physical child did not survive. What the school of Mensis made contact with through their ritual was not a living Great One child, but the spiritual remnant of a Great One child that had never been properly born and never properly died. This is why you can hear Murgo crying throughout the nightmare of Mensis, but never see the child. The pram at the top of the nightmare, tended by the wet nurse, appears empty, because Murgo is there as a presence, as a soul, as a sound, as the specific quality of something that should have lived and did not, rather than as a body that can be found and seen. When you defeat the wet nurse, Murgo's cries stop. The nightmare's anchor, the Great One presence that was sustaining the nightmare realm, is released. Not killed exactly, released. The soul that has been trapped in the nightmare since before the Mensis ritual, sustaining a space it never chose to inhabit, finally stops. Fact 32. The One Reborn, the enormous mass of bodies that serves as the boss fight before the nightmare of Mensis, is made of the Mensis scholars, who failed to successfully cross into the nightmare. When the Mensis ritual sent the scholars' minds forward and resulted in the stillbirth of their brains, their bodies remained in Yharnam. But the ritual that distributed their consciousness also distributed something else. The specific accumulation of blood and insight and cosmic contact that had been building in the school of Mensis over its entire existence. The bodies of the failed scholars fused together in the physical space of Yharnam, pulled by whatever remained of the shared ritual into a collective physical form. The One Reborn is the scholars, not their minds. Those are gone, stillborn in the failed crossing. It is their bodies and their accumulated blood and the specific consequence of a ritual that consumed everyone who participated in it except Mikolash. It regenerates during the fight by drawing from the bell maidens positioned around the arena. The ritual practitioners whose specific function is to maintain the connections between the physical world and the nightmare realm. The name, the One Reborn, refers to this collective constitution, the many scholars reborn as a single monstrous amalgamation. Whether this constitutes a mercy or a further punishment for people who died pursuing a crossing they did not achieve is a question the game does not answer. Fact 33. The abandoned old workshop contains a doll, an immobile, lifeless version of the same doll you speak to in the hunter's dream. This is the original before the moon presence gave her a soul. Deep in the cathedral ward, accessible through a secret passage, that the abandoned old workshop is where Gehrman built his weapons and trained his hunters before the moon presence created the hunter's dream. It is a physical location, not a nightmare realm, not a dream space, but the actual original workshop that predates everything the game's events take place in. In the workshop, there is a doll. She sits in the same position the active doll sits in within the hunter's dream. She has the same face, the same dress, the same posture. She does not move. She does not speak. She has no awareness of the hunter's presence. This is the object Gehrman made, before the moon presence animated it. The specific sadness of this location is that you can see the craft in the object. The care with which someone built something in the image of a person they loved, with no expectation that it would become more than an object. The moon presence gave the doll her soul not for Gehrman's sake, but for the dream's design. But the workshop doll shows you what was there before the design. The thing made purely out of feeling, before it was made useful. Fact 34. Ariana, the woman of the Knighton Cathedral ward, is a descendant of the Cainhurst line, and her blood has the specific quality that makes it useful beyond ordinary blood vials. Ariana's blood is described as gentle and nurturing, and has unusually powerful healing properties that differ from other NPC's blood. This is not coincidental. The Cainhurst vile bloods, the aristocrats who drank the unnamed scholar's forbidden blood, produced a bloodline of specific quality. Ariana is a descendant of this line, and working in Cathedral Ward in circumstances far removed from the aristocratic heritage that produced her blood type, but carrying that heritage in her veins nonetheless. This is also why, after the blood moon rises, Ariana becomes pregnant. She is one of the women who becomes a surrogate. The Great One influence of the blood moon seeking the specific blood type that can produce a viable pregnancy. The child she gives birth to in the aqueduct beneath Cathedral Ward is an umbilical cord source, one of the 4 available in the game. Byrgenwerth, the formless Great One, is the father of what she births. The umbilical cord description for her child's cord specifically mentions corrupted blood and Uden's liaison. Fact 35. The imposter Yosefka, the fake doctor who has taken over Yosefka's clinic, is a choir member conducting experiments on the survivors you send to her for safety. Every NPC you direct to Yosefka's clinic in good faith, believing you are sending them somewhere safe, is subjected to choir experiments. The real Yosefka was replaced by a choir member at some point before the game's events, and the impersonation is maintained through the locked door and the specific voice that tells you the clinic is safe and accepting patients. The transformed celestial mob enemies in Yosefka's clinic, encountered if you enter through the Forbidden Woods back door, are your survivors. The NPC you helped, the Mad Hatter-esque merchant, Adela the nun, and the various people you directed toward safety. They are in various stages of the choir's ascension experiments, their bodies being modified toward the transformation that the choir believed was the ultimate destination of blood ministration. The imposter Yosefka is herself pregnant by the time the blood moon rises, which produces the umbilical cord she drops when killed. She is, in the specific terrible irony of the situation, doing to others exactly what the blood moon is doing to her. Fact 36. the brain of Mensis. The enormous brain suspended in the pit below the nightmare of Mensis, which induces frenzy on sight, was a Mensis scholar whose ascension went wrong in a specific direction. The scholars of Mensis were seeking to elevate their consciousness to the level of the great ones. So the brain of Mensis is what happened when one of them got closest to that goal. A brain that expanded and grew into something vast, a being of tremendous psychic power, but without the physical form or the stable consciousness required to do anything with that power except radiate it. The frenzy induced by looking at the brain is the game's mechanical representation of what happens when ordinary human consciousness is exposed to something that has expanded too far beyond human scale. It is not malice. The brain does not intend to harm you. It simply exists at a level of psychic intensity that ordinary perception cannot absorb without damage. Throwing the special item down the pit, the tonsil stone, allows the brain to teleport the hunter to the lecture building. This is not an attack. It is the brain doing the one thing that beings capable of communication in Bloodborne do when they recognize something interesting. It brings you to the space where it can expose you to more of what it is. Fact 37. Patches appears in Bloodborne. He is a spider. Patches is the recurring trickster character who appears in every From Software game, pushing the player into pits, selling them items with dubious sincerity, maintaining the specific energy of someone who is fundamentally untrustworthy, but not quite villainous enough to be a genuine threat. In Bloodborne, he appears in the lecture building as Patches the Spider, a man whose lower body has been replaced by spider legs, which is precisely the kind of transformation that contact with the amygdala produces in certain individuals. He has his characteristic hat. He has his characteristic personality. He is in a wheelchair, which does not prevent him from propelling himself around with his spider legs. The specific horror of Patches in Bloodborne, beyond the obvious, is the implication in his transformation. The amygdala grants favors to those who make contact with it. The spider transformation is one of those favors. Patches somehow, in his wandering through the worlds From Software has built, managed to make contact with a Bloodborne Great One and receive its particular gift. What he traded for it is not specified. Knowing Patches, it was probably someone else's. Fact 38. The music box that you can use against Father Gascoigne during his boss fight, which causes him to stagger and briefly remember himself, was made by his daughter, and it plays a lullaby that Gascoigne and his wife used with their children. Father Gascoigne was a hunter of Yharnam, who has gone blood drunk by the time the hunter encounters him. He is one of the first significant boss fights in the game, and one of the most humanizing. His wife and daughters are encountered as NPCs before the fight, providing context for who he was before the blood madness took him, making the encounter something more than a simple obstacle. The music box his daughter gives you plays the specific lullaby their family used together. When you use it during the fight, Gascoigne hears it, and something in him responds. The beast state pauses, the madness recedes briefly, and for a moment you can see the father underneath the blood-drunk hunter. It is one of the game's most precise emotional moments. A man who has lost himself to violence momentarily recalled by the specific music that his children made for him, before the blood madness reasserts itself. It does not save him. Nothing saves him. But it gives him a moment that is recognizably himself before the end. Fact 39. The doll can be killed in the hunter's dream, and she will respawn the next time you visit. She will never comment on having been killed. She will continue to serve you with the same gentle attentiveness as before. This is one of the quieter horror details in a game full of loud ones. The doll is not simply available as an NPC who cannot be harmed. She can be killed. The player can attack her and she will fall. She will bleed. And the next time you return to the hunter's dream, she will be there again, in her place, as though nothing happened. Her lack of comment on this is not oversight. It is characterization. The doll exists in a state that has moved past the kind of hurt that being killed represents. She has been in the hunter's dream long enough, seen enough hunters come and go and fall and return, that the specific violence of being killed by one of them is not a new experience and not one she considers worth raising. She tends to the flame. She levels you up. She offers her gentleness to whatever version of the hunter arrives in front of her. Whether this represents acceptance or resignation or something that has moved past both into a quality that human emotional vocabulary does not quite reach, is one of the questions Bloodborne leaves open in the specific way that makes its characters resonate long after the game is finished. Fact 40. Jura, the old hunter atop the tower in old Yharnam, who fires a Gatling gun at anyone who enters, is one of only 2 characters in the entire game, besides the player, who can enter and exit the hunter's dream voluntarily. This detail is easy to miss in the noise of trying not to be shot. When you engage Jura in conversation without triggering his hostility, he tells you, "I no longer dream." The phrasing is specific and deliberate. Eileen the Crow uses similar language. Both of them were once connected to the dream, once sustained by the same cycle of dying and returning that the hunter operates within, and both of them found a way to step outside it. How they manage this disconnection is not explained. The game implies, through the phrasing and context, and that it requires a specific act of will, a rejection of the dream cycle that is possible only for hunters who have sufficiently understood what the cycle is. Both Jura and Eileen are old. Both have seen enough to understand what the hunt is and what the dream costs. Their disconnection from it is not something they achieved by accident. The practical consequence: both of them can die permanently. The hunter respawns at a bonfire. Jura and Eileen, outside the dream's protection, face the same mortality as ordinary humans. This is why Eileen's questline can end with her death. This is why Jura's refusal to leave old Yharnam is a genuine choice to stay in a place where he is genuinely vulnerable. He chose permanence over protection. Fact 41. Eileen the Crow's outfit. The crow feathers at the Plague Doctor mask is not simply an aesthetic choice. It represents a specific burial tradition, and her covenant's name is a reference to that tradition. The crow feather set description explains that crow hunters followed a specific ritual of burial, the hope that hunters who died would find rest in a sky burial, the practice of leaving a body exposed for carrion birds, allowing the flesh to be taken by nature rather than being interred in the ground. The crow motif is not decorative. It is the crow hunter's relationship to death made physical. The acknowledgement that the people they kill, the blood-drunk hunters who have lost themselves to violence, deserve a particular kind of end, and the mask itself is modelled after plague doctor masks from historical epidemics. The long beak filled with aromatic herbs that doctors believed would protect them from miasmatic contagion. In Bloodborne's context, this reads as protection from the blood plague. Eileen wears the protection of a profession that understood its work was exposure to something that would claim the practitioner if they were not careful. She passes this on to you at the end of her quest line. If everything goes correctly, the Crow Hunter badge, and with it the responsibility to do what she did. Find the hunters who have gone blood drunk and put them to rest before they become something worse than themselves. Fact 42. Henrik. The hunter you fight alongside Eileen at the tomb of Uden is almost certainly Father Gascoigne's father-in-law. His madness in the fight is grief, not simply bloodlust. Henrik is described as Gascoigne's longtime hunting partner, one of the old hunters who worked alongside the church's more formal hunter organization. They hunted together for an extended period, long enough that Henrik's unusual longevity is attributed to the specific benefits of extended hunting partnership within the dream. The young girl in central Yharnam mentions her grandfather. Given the geography of the quest, the young girl's mother Viola died near the tomb of Uden, where Henrik goes mad, and Henrik's close connection to Gascoigne. The most coherent reading is that Henrik is Viola's father. He came to the tomb of Uden because this is where his daughter died and where his son-in-law killed her. His madness is not abstract bloodlust. It is the specific grief of a person who has lost everyone in a place that holds the evidence of how he lost them. Eileen was sent to kill him because a blood-drunk hunter is a blood-drunk hunter regardless of their reasons for being in the state. The game does not offer grief as a protection from the hunt's judgment. Fact 43. The contract signed at the beginning of Bloodborne. The document whose text says that the patient accepts the terms of the medical procedure is a contract of servitude to Yharnam's nocturnal hunt, not simply a medical consent form. The first scene of the game shows the hunter on a table, receiving blood ministration from a man in a wheelchair. A document is presented. The text is too small and goes past too quickly for most first-time players to read. What it says, on examination, is that the patient agrees to bear the responsibilities of a hunter of Yharnam for the night of their treatment. The wheelchair man is suspected to be Caril, the runesmith who transcribed the voices of great ones into the Caril runes used throughout the game. Whether this is correct or simply a player theory is not confirmed. What is confirmed is that the contract is real, that the hunter signed it while still human and still capable of understanding what they were agreeing to, and that the entire night that follows, every death, every return, every monster and mystery and nightmare, is technically something they agreed to in advance. Whether the hunter understood what they were agreeing to is a different question. Fact 44. Alfred. The hunter devoted to Queen Annalise's destruction. murders Annalise at the end of his questline using the Wheel Hunter Badge's weapon, and his action achieves precisely nothing useful. Alfred is one of the most warmly presented NPCs in the early game. He is cheerful, genuinely friendly, devoted to his cause with an earnestness that is charming, precisely because the game is otherwise so austere. His mission, to destroy Queen Annalise and her vile bloods, in the name of his teacher Ligarius, who gave his life containing her, seems coherent within the game's logic. When you give him the unopened summons that lets him enter Cainhurst, Alfred goes and kills Annalise. When you return to Cainhurst, you find him there, not triumphant, not satisfied, but broken. He kills himself with a wheel attack shortly after. His teacher died for this. He spent his life for this. And Annalise, who is effectively immortal, can simply be revived at the altar in Cainhurst if you have the appropriate item. Alfred achieved nothing. His entire life's purpose was built on a vendetta that could not be permanently resolved, in service of a teacher who dedicated himself to containing something rather than destroying it. His warmth and his commitment were real. The project they served was not adequate to the weight he placed on it. Fact 45. Gilbert, the Westerner you speak to through a window in central Yharnam, who gives you the flame sprayer, transforms into a beast by the time the blood moon rises. If you kill him, he drops a warm blood gemstone. Gilbert is one of the game's gentlest NPCs. He communicates only through a first-floor window, too ill to go outside, sharing what information he has about Yharnam with a newcomer. His voice is tired and kind. He came to Yharnam seeking the blood healing for his illness, the same reason the hunter is nominally there. He is the most ordinary person in the game, simply a sick man who came to the wrong place for treatment. By the time the blood moon rises, he is no longer speaking through the window. He is outside, transformed. The specific tragedy of Gilbert is that the blood ministration he sought was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It was just doing it toward an end he never agreed to. The blood healed him enough to keep him alive until the transformation could complete. Killing him ends something that was already ending. The warm blood gemstone he drops carries in its item description the warmth of a body that held onto humanity longer than most. Fact 46. Walter, the head of the League Covenant, the hunter who consumed the vermin, has been eating the parasitic creatures he extracts from defeated enemies since before the events of the game. And the specific consequence of this is that his perception of reality has been altered. The League is a covenant of hunters dedicated to finding and consuming the vermin. Tiny parasitic creatures that Walter can perceive writhing within the corpses of defeated enemies, which he believes are the root of the corruption that creates beasts and monsters. His specific philosophical project is that purging the vermin from the world, creature by creature, is the work that will ultimately cleanse Yharnam. The other hunters cannot see the vermin. The ability to perceive them is unique to Walter, and by consuming them repeatedly, he has developed a relationship to the parasites that most other beings have not. When you eventually remove his unique helmet, the helmet that allows him to see the vermin, and pick it up in his place, the younger Madara's twin appears and attacks you. He has been waiting for Walter to lose what makes him Walter, what the vermin actually are. whether they are genuinely the root of the beast plague, or whether Walter's perception of them is itself a form of the madness that the blood produces, is left open. The game allows the possibility that he is right, and the possibility that he has built an elaborate cosmology around a perception that is itself a symptom. Fact 47. The Bloody Crow of Cainhurst, the invader hunter who attacks you in the Grand Cathedral during Eileen's questline, is one of the most powerful enemies in the game, and almost certainly represents what Eileen would have become if she had not maintained herself. The Bloody Crow wears Cainhurst armor and wields the Chikage, the Cainhurst blade that drains the user's own health to fuel its power. He invades with the specific aggression of someone who has gone blood drunk in the Cainhurst tradition, consuming their own blood as fuel for violence, trading health for damage until something breaks first. The crow motif connects him to the crow hunter's covenant, suggesting he was once part of the same tradition as Eileen, or something parallel to it. The Cainhurst variant of a hunter who has lost themselves to the blood is what Eileen might have become if she had accepted the Cainhurst bloodline's path, rather than stepping outside the dream. He is, in practice, one of the hardest non-DLC encounters in the game. He punishes aggression, he punishes healing, he punishes standing still. He is what a blood-drunk hunter of the highest capability looks like when that capability is no longer directed by anything except the drive to consume and destroy. Fact 48. The cry of Murgo can be heard throughout the entire nightmare of Mensis, even before you reach the boss area, and it becomes audible in the waking world if you listen carefully in specific locations after Rom's death. The blood moon rising after Rom's defeat does not only change the visual environment of Yharnam, it changes what can be heard. The barrier between the nightmare and the waking world, maintained by Rom's existence as a veil, has thinned. The specific consequence of this thinning is that the cry of Murgo, which exists in the nightmare as the ghost presence of the child that never fully died, bleeds through. This is one of the subtlest pieces of environmental storytelling in the game. Most players do not consciously register it. The change in the sound environment after Rom's death is real and deliberate. You are hearing the nightmare through the gap that Murgo's presence keeps open. The child who lost its mother and was taken into a nightmare realm before it ever had the chance to know the world it briefly existed in. Fact 49. Henrik's yellow outfit, the Henrik's Hunter set, is a reference to the Xantau set from Dark Souls. The game is not simply reusing an aesthetic. Henrik himself is a thematic parallel to the Xantau scholar, whose yellow is associated with a specific form of magic that transforms the user at great cost. This is a connection that operates at the level of From Software's design language, rather than within the explicit lore of either game. The Xantau set in Dark Souls is associated with sorcerers who sought forbidden knowledge at the cost of their physical form. Henrik's yellow armor in Bloodborne dresses a hunter who has outlived the context that gave his life meaning. Both yellows mark their wearers as people who went further than was perhaps wise, who bought something significant at a cost they did not fully calculate in advance. The specific tragedy of both characters is that what they found was real and worth having, and that the finding of it did not protect them from what came after. Fact 50. The hunter's axe, one of the starting weapons, was designed by Gehrman himself, along with every other trick weapon. His workshop in the abandoned old workshop was the origin point of the entire trick weapon tradition. Gehrman was not simply the first hunter in the sense of being the first person to hunt beasts. He was the inventor of the hunting discipline as a technical and artistic practice. The person who looked at the problem of beasts that required both reach and adaptability, and designed the class of weapons capable of transforming from one form to another to address changing combat needs. Every trick weapon in the game traces its design philosophy back to the workshop Gehrman built before the hunter's dream existed. The saw cleaver, the hunter axe, the threaded cane. These are not simply weapons. They are the physical expression of Gehrman's specific genius, the craft output of a person who was, before everything else, a maker of extraordinary things. The tragedy is that what he made outlasted the context he made it in. The hunter's dream continues his work. New hunters come, receive weapons descended from his designs, hunt beasts in Yharnam, while he sits in his garden, old and trapped and gentle, and unable to leave the thing he helped create. What? Fact 51. The Healing Church Workshop, the institution that trained hunters officially associated with the Healing Church, and Gehrman's original Hunters' Workshop were separate institutions that existed in tension. Gehrman did not work for the Healing Church. He worked alongside Lawrence and Mikolash during the Byrgenwerth period. But when Lawrence founded the church and established the Healing Church Workshop as its formal hunter training institution, Gehrman and his old hunters were something different. The older, more informal tradition that predated the church's organization of everything. The specific tension between the two institutions is visible in Jura's attitudes. The Jura was a powder keg hunter, associated with the subgroup of the church's workshops that were eventually formally excluded from the main workshop system. His contempt for the current hunters, his sense that the original practice had been bureaucratized into something less honest, is the attitude of someone who knew what hunting looked like before it became an institution. Ludwig came later and made the church's hunting system the dominant force. His organization, his discipline, his charisma absorbing what the old hunters had been into something larger and more formal. The Old Hunters DLC is, among other things, the history of what was lost in that absorption. Fact 52. The man in the wheelchair who administers the blood at the beginning of the game is mentioned only as a strange old man in the opening cinematic text, but fan analysis and item descriptions have led most careful players to identify him as Carol, the runesmith who transcribed Great One voices into the inscribable runes used throughout the game. Carol runes are one of the game's most unusual systems, circular marks that can be inscribed on the hunter's body to grant specific effects, each one described as the transcription of a Great One's voice into a form that human bodies can absorb. Caril was a Byrgenwerth scholar who developed this specific ability. To hear what the Great Ones were saying and translated it into something useful. The wheelchair man at the beginning of the game is old, scholarly, and specifically associated with the blood contract. If he is Carol, his presence at the game's opening is the specific irony of the person who spent their life translating Great One communications being the one who initiates the hunter into a relationship with the Great One's oldest tool. The blood that changes everything it touches. Whether this identification is correct or not, what matters is that the game's opening is not random. The person who administers the blood, who holds the contract, who begins the night, was chosen carefully. The contract is the starting point of everything that follows. Fact 53. Vicar Amelia is still praying when she transforms. She never stops. When you approach the altar at the far end of the Grand Cathedral, and Amelia begins her transformation, her body rupturing, her shape changing, the tattered white robes of her office shredding under the growth of grey fur and antlers. She is in the middle of prayer. She is speaking words that the game does not subtitle. She is asking for something. In her beast form, during the fight, she still prays. The healing animation, the moment when she folds her transformed claws together and the golden light restores her health, is a prayer. She is not simply generating a game mechanic. She is doing the only thing she knows to do when the world has exceeded her ability to navigate it. She asks the divine for help in the specific form she was trained to ask. She is clutching the gold pendant, Lawrence's pendant, the inheritance of the office of vicar, in her hands throughout the fight. She was given this pendant as a symbol of her position. She dies still holding it, still defined by the role that the church gave her, still performing the devotion that role required, in the body that the same church's blood ministration eventually produced. Fact 54. Killing Vicar. Amelia does not change the world's state tonight. Only touching Lawrence's skull on the altar behind her arena does. This is a mechanical fact that carries lore weight. The transition from the game's first phase, daytime, the hunt beginning, to the game's second phase, the full night of the blood moon's descent, is triggered not by defeating the vicar, but by interacting with her superior's remains. Lawrence left his skull in the Grand Cathedral. The skull is on the altar. To pass through to the Forbidden Woods and continue the story, you must examine it. This is the game's way of saying that the night does not begin because you have defeated the church's hierarchy. It begins because you have touched the remnant of the person who started everything. The Byrgenwerth scholar who founded the healing church, who distributed the blood, who set the processes in motion that produced the beast and the hunt, and every tragedy the game depicts. You kill Amelia. You find Lawrence's skull. And then the night truly begins. From Fact 55. The Forbidden Woods are called forbidden because the healing church sealed them off to hide the path to Byrgenwerth, not because of the creatures within them. The woods contain serpents, villagers transformed by exposure to the knowledge of the Great Ones, the remnants of communities that had too much contact with what lay beneath the earth. These things are genuine threats and genuinely belong in a place a city might want to wall off. But the specific reason they are forbidden, the reason the church sealed the path through them, is that the woods lead to Byrgenwerth, and Byrgenwerth is where the truth begins. The truth about the blood, the truth about what the church was built on, the truth about the fishing hamlet and the massacre and the umbilical cord and Master Willem and everything Lawrence built his institution on top of. The church sealed the Forbidden Woods to protect a secret, not a danger. The danger was a consequence of what they put there. The secrecy was a choice. Fact 56. The blood-starved beast, the boss in Old Yharnam's sealed church, is a Pthumerian, not a Yharnamite. Its body structure and the item it drops connect it to the ancient civilization beneath the city rather than to the modern population above. The blood-starved beast drops the Pthumeru chalice when defeated, an artifact from the Pthumerian civilization that allows access to the chalice dungeons beneath Yharnam. This is not an incidental reward. It is a lore statement. The creature is physically connected to the Pthumerian civilization, whose remnants fill the dungeons below. The Pthumerians were exposed to the old blood and the presence of great ones far longer than the current population of Yharnam. The blood-starved beast represents what that prolonged exposure produces. A transformation that has run further and in different directions than the ordinary Yharnamite beast transformation, shaped by a different relationship to the blood and a different duration of contact. It is also, notably, the most blood-starved of any beast in the game, driven by a hunger that exceeds even what other beasts demonstrate, as though the Pthumerian relationship to blood has produced a need that ordinary transformation does not. Fact 57. The cleric beast on the Great Bridge. The first optional boss encounter in the game was a cleric of the Healing Church, and the badge dropped by defeating it grants access to weapons associated with church hunters. The Sword Hunter badge obtained from the cleric beast's defeat unlocks the hunter scythe and other weapons in the Bath Messenger's stock. The badge itself is described as a silver sword that is the symbol of a church hunter. The cleric beast was, before the transformation, a member of the church's religious hierarchy. A cleric, the specific profession that the church's hybrid religious medical function required. The transformation into a beast that is specifically cleric-shaped. The antlers, the long limbs, the elongated form that reads as a distorted version of a tall, a thin person in religious robes, is what happens when the people most connected to administering the blood receive enough of it. The bridge where you fight it is the same bridge where, early in the game, you can hear it screaming from a distance before you see it. The game gives you the sound of the horror before the sight of it, asking you to approach something you already know is there, already know is terrible. The first monster in Bloodborne is announced to you. It does not hide. Fact 58. Cainhurst Castle is outside the Blood Moon's influence. The red sky that hangs over Yharnam after Rom's death does not reach the castle, and this is visible if you look at the sky from the castle grounds. Cainhurst is geographically and cosmically isolated from Yharnam. The road to it was destroyed long ago. Our access requires a supernatural summons. The moon influence that drives the scourge, the proximity of the moon presence that turns the infected population into beasts during the blood moon, does not extend to a location that was explicitly cut off from Yharnam by the Healing Church's executioners. The practical consequence is that Cainhurst, for all its Bloodborne horror, is a place where the specific catastrophe of the Blood Moon night has not arrived. The castle is frozen in the moment of the executioner's massacre. The dead nobles roaming as ghosts, Annalise immortal and waiting, everything preserved in the specific stasis of a place where the killing happened, But the ordinary progression of time did not resume afterward. You visit Cainhurst in the middle of a night that the rest of Yharnam is consumed by, and find a place that is somehow untouched by that specific night. It is a horror of a different kind, not the blood and transformation of the scourge, but the still, cold persistence of something that was destroyed and refuses to acknowledge it. Fact 59. The Witch of Hemwick, the optional boss in Hemwick Charnel Lane, is not a traditional monster. She is a human who has developed the ability to summon madmen from the surrounding darkness, and she is nearly invisible during the fight. The witch is physically unremarkable. An old woman, barely visible, spending most of the fight invisible entirely, while her madmen minions attack the player. When you manage to hit her, she becomes briefly visible and briefly vulnerable, and then she disappears again. This combat design is a lore statement. The witch's power is not in herself, but in what she can call. Her ability to summon the madmen, the specific creatures that represent the human mind broken down to its most violent and lost state, is the consequence of extended proximity to the Hemwick area, where the healing church's refuse was dumped, the eyes extracted from the fishing hamlet villagers, the discarded products of experiments gone wrong. The witch harvested what the church threw away and built something from it. Her drops include Carol runes, suggesting a connection to the runesmith tradition, or possibly that the ability to summon madmen is itself a form of rune work, a different application of the same principle of transcribing Great One influence into a usable form. Quashina. Fact 60. The Nightmare Frontier, accessible through the tonsil stone obtained from the Red Lantern NPCs, is a realm of Amygdalae, and it is a nightmare that no single human host is anchoring. Every other nightmare in Bloodborne is tied to a specific person or being whose consciousness anchors the space. Gehrman anchors the hunter's dream. Mikolash anchors the nightmare of Mensis. Murgo's presence anchors the space around Murgo's loft. The Nightmare Frontier has no such anchor. It is a collective space maintained by the Amygdalae themselves, who have established a shared nightmare environment for reasons the game does not entirely explain. The Amygdalae are classified as Great Ones, but of a lesser type. The game distinguishes between the cosmic level Great Ones like the Moon Presence and Oeden, and the Amygdalae, who are somehow closer to the physical world while still being fundamentally beyond ordinary human comprehension. Their nightmare is accordingly different from the other nightmare spaces, not built around one consciousness's hopes and guilts, but around the specific quality that a congregation of Amygdalae produces when they gather in a shared space. The boss at the center of the frontier, Amygdala itself, is the most physical manifestation of the creature that has been clinging to the walls of Cathedral Ward since the beginning of the game. What it wants from the things it draws into its nightmare, whether it feeds on them, studies them, or simply collects them the way a mind accumulates observations, is not explained. Fact 61. There are no surviving male Cainhurst nobles. Every ghost in Cainhurst Castle is a woman. The executioners of the Healing Church, who came to Cainhurst and killed its inhabitants on the orders of the church, apparently left no male nobles alive and no male ghosts in the aftermath. The women who linger as spectral presences in the castle's halls are all that remain of an aristocratic society that the Church decided was heretical and needed to be destroyed. Why only the women remain is a question the game leaves in its specific silence. The possibilities range from the practical, the women's blood type being different enough from the men's to produce a different relationship to death and persistence, to the cosmologically significant, the specific quality of Cainhurst's blood, the vile blood type associated with Annalise and the women of her court, at producing the kind of existence that can persist as a ghost where ordinary human death produces nothing. Annalise herself is not a ghost. She is genuinely present, genuinely alive, genuinely immortal in the specific way that her vile blood status grants. She is the only living thing in the castle. Everything else is what outlasted life. Fact 62. The skeptical man, the NPC who tells you he does not believe in the beast or the hunt, will move to the location you tell him to go to, but always does the opposite of what you recommend. If you tell him to go to Erden Chapel, he goes to Iosefka's clinic. If you tell him to go to the clinic, he goes to the chapel. He is defined by his refusal to take anyone's word for what is happening around him. An attitude that is, in the context of Yharnam, both epistemically reasonable and practically dangerous. His fate, wherever he ends up, is not good. The game provides no version of the skeptical man's story that ends well. His skepticism, his refusal to believe in what the hunt is before he has personal evidence of it, is the exact quality that Yharnam destroys most efficiently. Everything in Yharnam is evidence of what it is. The person who requires additional evidence before accepting what is plainly present will always encounter the plainly present thing at a moment when additional evidence is fatal. Fact 63. Adela the nun, the bloodthirsty NPC you can send to Uden Chapel, will kill Ariana if she sees you receive Ariana's blood. Her motive is jealousy, expressed as religious devotion. Adela offers her blood to the hunter as a form of service to the divine. She is a nun, and providing blood is her contribution to the hunt. When Ariana also offers her blood, and particularly if she provides blood while Adela is present, Adela's devotion curdles into something more personal. She will kill Ariana in the night following the hunter receiving the competing blood. The explanation she gives when confronted is theological. Ariana's blood is sinful, corrupted, unfit for the hunter who serves the gods. The theological explanation is real. Ariana's Cainhurst blood is the specific blood type the Church considered heretical. But the delivery, the timing, and the specific intensity of Adela's response to seeing someone else provide what she provides suggests that the theology is a language through which something more human is expressing itself. Adela's capacity for violence, her willingness to murder a woman she has been sitting near in safety for the entire night, is the game's reminder that the people who came to Yharnam for ordinary human reasons, faith, healing, care, are not protected from the specific corruption of the place by their ordinariness. Fact 64. The cleric beasts. Amelia, the cleric beast on the bridge, Lawrence, all share the same boss theme. This is deliberate. They are all the same story. The cleric beast boss music plays for every transformed member of the Healing Church clergy. not because From Software ran out of tracks, but because the same music for the same type of being makes a specific statement. These are not different monsters. They are the same outcome, reached by different paths. The Church produced this outcome. The blood the Church distributed, the faith the Church cultivated, the hierarchy the Church maintained. All of it converged on the same transformation when the people most involved in administering it received enough of what they were giving to others. The melody that plays when you fight a cleric who has become a beast is the sound of an institution completing itself. What the Healing Church built, in the bodies of the people who built it, is what the music marks each time it plays. Fact 65. The prayer Vicar Amelia recites in her human form, before the transformation, is a real prayer, and it describes what the Healing Church considered the purpose of the blood. The prayer, transcribed from the game's audio, asks for the courage to seek the truth of the blood, to face the ancient evil that lurks within the darkness, and to maintain the clarity to distinguish the sacred from the profane. It is a prayer that acknowledges danger, that asks for the strength to face it, and that frames the entire project of the Healing Church, the blood, the hunt, the communion with the Great Ones, as a sacred mission requiring divine courage. The irony is exact. Amelia is praying for the courage to face the ancient evil lurking in darkness, while the ancient evil lurking in darkness is the blood that she has been administering, the blood that is in her veins, the blood that is at this moment transforming her body into the specific monster she has been praying to fight. The Church's prayer for protection from what it summoned, offered by a vicar who is simultaneously the defender and the victim of what the Church is, in the moments before she becomes what she was praying against. For fact 66. The Orphan of Kos stares at the sky when you first encounter it. It looks up before it knows you are there, before the fight begins, at something the hunter cannot see. The fishing hamlet arena, the stretch of dark beach under a sun that is wrong, too yellow, the light of a nightmare rather than a real sky, is where Kos's body lies. The orphan emerges from beneath it, covered in the viscera of the mother it never properly left, and before it registers the hunter's presence and begins the fight, it stands and looks upward. The game does not explain what it is looking at. The most coherent reading is that it is looking at Kos, at the presence of its dead mother in the cosmic plane, the mind of a great one that persists beyond the physical death of the body. Every great one loses its child. In the nightmare, the reverse has occurred. The child has lost its mother and exists in a nightmare sustained by the specific grief of what was done at the hamlet. The orphan looks upward at the only mother it has, the dead one, whose presence it can still feel in whatever way a being born into a nightmare can feel the presence of something that should have been there. When you kill the orphan, a black phantom of it, its true self, its lasting presence, lingers near Kos's body. The physical form was not the being is what remains. Fact 67. The orphan fights using its own placenta as a weapon. In its second phase, the placenta transforms into something resembling a blade. The Orphan of Kos was born with nothing except its own birth tissue, and it turned that into the only weapon it had, The placenta, in biological terms, is the organ that connects a developing child to its mother's womb. The interface of sustenance, the physical link between the child's life and the mother's body. The Orphan of Kos, born from a dead mother whose body was violated by the scholars who came to take what they could find, has only this: the remnant of the connection that was severed when those scholars took the umbilical cord for their research. It fights with what it was left with. The rage that animates the Orphan of Kos, the screaming, the relentless aggression, the specific ferocity of an entity that has been harmed in a way that precedes its own awareness, is expressed through the one physical thing it retained from the moment of its partial birth. In the second phase, the placenta transforms. The birth tissue becomes something harder, something more dangerous. The orphan has been in the nightmare long enough that even its weapon has grown in the direction that the nightmare produces. Harder, stranger, more capable of harm than what it started as. Fact 68. Kos is still alive in the nightmare. When the orphan reaches its second phase and screams, lightning erupts from Kos's corpse on the beach. The body of Kos is physically dead. A corpse washed ashore, its parasites long since teeming from within it, its flesh decomposing through the nightmare's strange time. But the mind of a great one, as the game establishes, is not the same as its body. Kos died physically, but her presence in the cosmic plane persists. And in the nightmare that was created by the curse her death produced, and that presence is close enough to the physical world to respond when her child calls. The lightning that comes from Kos's corpse when the orphan cries is not ambient. It is a response. The dead mother, from wherever she persists beyond death, still hears her child and answers. The nightmare is the space where what could not complete itself in the physical world continues. And the incomplete bond between Kos and her child, severed by the scholars before it could form, continues here in its incomplete way. The fishing hamlet chanter who cannot be killed, the villager who stands near the entrance muttering prayers, immune to any amount of violence, calls to Kos and calls down the curse. He has been saying this since before the hunter arrived. He will be saying it after. She. Fact 69. Defeating the Orphan of Kos ends the Old Hunters DLC, and the specific ending is described as a sending off rather than a victory. The final dialogue of the DLC, spoken by the messengers at the nightmare's dissolution, is, "You have made a fine hunter. The nightmare has passed." The language is not that of combat. It is that of completion, of something that needed to reach its end being allowed to reach it. The hunter's nightmare was not simply a prison for blood-drunk hunters. It was, from a certain perspective, the space in which the specific harm that created it had to be worked through before it could dissolve. The hunters trapped within it were there not simply as punishment, but as participants in a process that required playing out. The sins of the fishing hamlet running to their conclusion. The nightmare that those sins created finally being allowed to end. Killing the orphan is not the usual violent resolution of a boss fight. It is, in the nightmare's specific logic, the act that allows what has been sustained in pain to finally rest. The doll says that Gehrman is sleeping peacefully. The nightmare dissolves. Not destroyed, completed. Fact 70. The Kos parasite. The weapon dropped by the Orphan of Kos. cannot be used effectively without the milkweed rune, and the milkweed rune transforms the hunter into a lumen wood. The weapon and the transformation are both a tribute to Kos. The Kos parasite is described as a weapon that stimulates phantasms inhabiting a lumen wood, a tree-like form associated with Great One proximity and cosmic connection. Without the milkweed rune, the weapon functions but weakly. With it, the hunter transforms. Their body becomes partially lumenwood-like, rooted in cosmic soil, and the parasites from Kos's body respond to this transformation by becoming genuinely powerful. The milkweed rune was envisioned by Adeline, one of the research hall patients whose ascension produced a specific form of cosmic connection rather than the usual deterioration. She managed to reach something coherent in her transformation, and what she reached allows her to give the hunter the rune that completes the relationship between the parasite and its host. To use the orphan's weapon most effectively, you must become something the orphan's mother would recognize, a lumen wood, a form she would have nurtured. It is the game's most complete expression of how its items carry relationship rather than simply function. Fact 71. Carol runes are inscribed on the hunter's body, not worn, not held, but physically written into the flesh. The runes are transcriptions of Great One voices, made by a runesmith who could hear what the Great Ones were saying and translate it. The Carol runes as a mechanic require a workshop tool to inscribe. In lore terms, what this means is that using a Carol rune involves having a specific tool used to physically mark your body with a transcription of a cosmic voice. Each rune represents a different message, different Great Ones, different aspects of what the cosmos communicates to those who can hear it, translated into a form that can be absorbed by a human body and produce specific physical effects. The rune described as I, a transcription of the very basics of what Byrgenwerth sought, grants additional insight upon consumption of blood echoes. The rune described as beast is described as one of the earliest runes, now forbidden, discovered when the blood entailed the discovery of undesirable beasts. The rune for Uden, the formless Great One, appears in several forms associated with bullets and the specific power of formlessness. Every rune is a voice. Every hunter who uses the workshop tools is writing on their own body the words of beings they cannot fully understand, in a language their flesh can process, even when their minds cannot. Fact 72. The Carol, rune for blood, one of the most common runes in the game, depicts what appears to be a droplet, but in the context of the rune tradition, and it represents the specific relationship between blood and the cosmic forces that the blood carries. Blood in Bloodborne is not simply a biological fluid. It is the medium through which the influence of the Great Ones moves through the world. The vector of transformation, the substance that carries the cosmic alongside the physical. When the blood changes people, it is not simply the chemistry of the fluid that produces the change. It is what the fluid contains that the human body cannot fully process. The blood rune, inscribed on the hunter's body, aligns their blood more closely with this cosmic dimension, makes them more capable of receiving what blood carries, more resistant to the ordinary deterioration that blood contact produces. It is simultaneously a protection and a deeper involvement. You are more blood, are more protected by its influence, and more thoroughly immersed in the relationship between human beings and the beings whose blood has been distributed through the world's veins for generations. Fact 73. The Hunter's Dream version of the workshop contains a music box in Gehrman's area that plays a lullaby. It is the same lullaby that Gascoigne's daughter gave the hunter in the main game. The music box in the dream suggests that Gehrman had a connection to the family before the events of the game. The specific presence of this music box in Gehrman's personal space in the hunter's dream, which takes its architecture from his memory and his emotional landscape, is one of the most quietly devastating details in the DLC. The music box plays Viola's lullaby. The music that Gascoigne's daughter made to recall her father was also apparently something Gehrman kept with him across the long centuries of the dream. The connection between Gehrman and the family is not explicitly stated. What the music box establishes is that Gehrman cared about them in some specific and personal way. That the music which recalls a blood-drunk hunter to himself for a moment was also music that a trapped and ancient man kept close in his prison, for reasons that the game does not need to explain, because the presence of the object explains everything it needs to. Fact 74. The guidance rune, discovered by Ludwig while exploring the tombs, depicts small beings of light that he believed were pointing him towards something sacred. These beings are visible in specific areas of the game if the player looks carefully enough. Ludwig's discovery of the guidance rune preceded his becoming the first healing church hunter of his era. He found something in the Pthumerian labyrinths that he interpreted as divine direction. Tiny luminous beings showing the way through darkness towards something the ordinary senses could not perceive. The rune he inscribed describes this experience, the feeling of being led through darkness by small lights. In specific areas of the game, in the approach to the abandoned old workshop, in certain parts of the Pthumerian labyrinths, these small luminous beings are present. They do not interact. They do not speak. They are simply there, moving slightly, visible if you look in the directions that few players look. Whether they are genuinely guiding something, whether Ludwig's interpretation of them as sacred direction was correct, or whether they are simply one of the game's ambient presences without specific intent, is one of the questions that Bloodborne leaves open in its characteristic way. Fact 75. The silhouette of the Orphan of Kos can be seen in the bloodstain in front of Lady Maria's seat in the astral clock tower. Before you ever reach the fishing hamlet, Lady Maria guards the approach to the fishing hamlet. Her arena in the astral clock tower is the physical threshold between the research hall's failed experiments and the truth of what the hunters did at the hamlet. And in the bloodstain on the floor in front of her elevated seat, the bloodstain that marks the space where she repeatedly died in the nightmare, and Anne repeatedly returned to her position. The silhouette of the orphan is visible. This detail was discovered by players examining the environment carefully. It is small enough and dark enough that most players pass over it without registering what it represents. What it represents is Maria has been dying and returning in a nightmare space that already contained the evidence of what she was guarding. The orphan's silhouette Embedded in the blood that marks her deaths is the specific guilt that has been with her every time she returned to take her position again. She is the guardian of the hamlet's secret. The secret's shape is in the blood she spilled in guarding it. Fact 76. The hunter's nightmare originally had no escape. Before the hunter's dream was created, every hunter who died, consumed by bloodlust, are broken by the hunt, ended in the specific way that hunters ended, went to the nightmare. No one came back. The dream was not simply a training ground. It was, among other things, a buffer between dead hunters and the nightmare that would otherwise claim all of them. When Gehrman was given the dream, when the moon presence, for whatever its reasons were, created the space and bound Gehrman to it, the consequence was that the hunters who died in Yharnam now went to the dream rather than directly to the nightmare. The dream gave them a place to exist between deaths, a space to recover and return to the hunt. The nightmare still claims those who become blood drunk, those who lose themselves so completely to the violence that the dream cannot maintain them. The hunters you encounter in the hunter's nightmare are the ones who cross that threshold. But the dream's existence means that most hunters, most of the time, are protected from the specific damnation that blood-drunk hunters face. Whether the moon presence created the dream specifically to prevent hunters from going to the nightmare, to prevent the nightmare space from being overloaded with the souls of all the hunters the hunt required, or whether it created the dream for its own reasons regarding the surrogate child it was seeking, and the nightmare buffering was an incidental consequence, is one of the questions the game leaves open. Fact 77. The word nightmare in Bloodborne is not used casually. Every nightmare space has a specific origin, a specific anchor, and a specific function. They are not simply dreams. The hunter's dream is technically a nightmare, a constructed space anchored to a consciousness, operating according to different rules than the waking world. The nightmare of Mensis was constructed by the Mensis ritual, anchored by Amygdalae. The hunter's nightmare was created by the curse of Kos, anchored by the specific guilt of the fishing hamlet massacre. In Bloodborne's cosmology, a nightmare is the space where what cannot be resolved in the waking world continues. The specific grief or guilt or desire that produces a nightmare shapes the space that the nightmare becomes. Gehrman's hopes and desires shape the hunter's dream into the garden and workshop it is. Amygdalae's aspirations shape the nightmare of Mensis into the castle of his intellectual ambitions. The curse of Kos shaped the hunter's nightmare into an endless bloody hunt through the ruins of the world that produced it. Every nightmare is someone's unfinished business, given space to continue. Fact 78. The text that dissolves the hunter's nightmare, the message the messengers give when the orphan is defeated, is the same structure as the messages that appear when other major bosses are defeated. But this message is the only one addressed directly to the hunter rather than describing what was slain. Other boss defeat messages read, Nightmare slain, Great One slain, Beast slain. These are third-person descriptions of the hunter's action, what was ended, what was defeated. The message after the orphan reads, You have made a fine hunter. Second person, addressed to you. the nightmare that evaluated the hunter's worthiness, the space that was sustained by the sin of hunting gone wrong, is completing itself by acknowledging what the hunter became within it. You were not defeating a monster. You were completing a process. The nightmare says so explicitly, in the only boss defeat message in the game that speaks directly to the person who played through it. The nightmare is over. It found what it was waiting for. Fact 79. Saint Adeline, the research hall patient who asks the hunter for brain fluid, was a blood saint of the healing church before she became a patient of the experiments she is now subject to. Blood saints were nuns chosen specifically for their merit as vessels for blood. Women with blood types and blood qualities considered suitable for sharing with others in the church's ministration program. Adela the nun in the main game is another blood saint. They were the church's most intimate participants in the blood system. Their own bodies were the vessels. Their own blood was the gift. Adeline volunteered. Her quest line's item descriptions include a reference to a young girl whose brother was determined to become a doctor and who willingly became his patient. The early healing church's experiments with brain fluid and water, the attempt to induce the growth of internal eyes through specific ingestion, were administered in part by willing participants who believed they were engaged in sacred work. Adeline believed this. She came to the research hall in the belief that what was being done to her was meaningful and holy. By the time the hunter meets her, she is blind, bound, her head expanding beyond ordinary human proportion, sustained by the brain fluid that keeps the process moving in the direction she has chosen. She is still choosing. She still asks for what she needs to continue. Lady Maria had cared for her, given her the key to the balcony so she could feel the breeze from outside, an act of small and genuine human kindness in a place dedicated to something else. But Maria is gone, entrapped in the nightmare, and Adeline is alone except for whoever brings her what she asks for. She dies when she finally envisions the milkweed rune. She reaches what she was reaching for. The process completes, and she dies peacefully, having found what she came to find. Fact 80. The brain fluid items in the research hall. Each have a different description, and together they tell the story of the early healing church's experiments of water and sound and the internal eyes they were seeking. The first brain fluid description. The cerebral patients would imbibe water and listen for the howl of the sea. Brain fluid writhed inside the head, the initial makings of internal eyes. The second, a young girl had an older brother who was determined to become a doctor, and so she willingly became his patient. In the end, and this led to their encounter with the eldritch truth, for which they considered themselves blessed. The third, we fail to realize our own latent potential until the moment it is lost and we sense its absence. Ironically, this is the very nature of insight, like the moment one licks one's own blood, only to be startled by its sweetness. 3 items, 3 paragraphs of description, each one a complete thought. Together, they form a narrative, the method, the person who submitted to it, and what insight actually is. The recognition of something you always had but could not perceive until the process of losing it made you aware it was there. The brain fluid descriptions are as complete a piece of writing as anything in the game, delivered as item text rather than dialogue, readable only by the player who thinks to read them. Fact 81. There is a wolf figure under the bed in the altar room near the research hall. The opening cinematic of Bloodborne shows a wolf figure under the bed, where the hunter receives their first blood transfusion. This detail connects two locations that are physically and narratively distant. The hunter's first experience in Yharnam, the transfusion that begins their transformation, happens in a room where a wolf figure lurks beneath the furniture. In the research hall, where the church conducted its most systematic experiments on the willing patients, the same figure is present. The explanation this offers is quiet and disturbing. The wolf beneath the bed is not a unique feature of the hunter's experience. Many people who received the blood transfusion encountered this figure in the liminal state between ordinary consciousness and whatever the blood induced. The messengers appear only to those the dream chooses, but the wolf beneath the bed is present in both places, suggesting it precedes the hunter's specific experience, that it is a consistent feature of the blood-induced altered state that the church's experiments reliably produce. What the wolf is, what it represents, why it appears in this specific position. The game does not answer this. It simply places it in two locations connected by the act of receiving the church's blood, and leaves the connection for the player to find. Fact 82. Brador, the church assassin, the hunter who invades the player repeatedly in the fishing hamlet, imprisoned himself in a cell in the research hall and asked the church to lock him in. Brador committed a specific act that the church wanted no one to know about. He killed Ludwig. Not the Ludwig of the hunter's nightmare, but a version of Ludwig. Possibly while Ludwig was still alive, possibly in circumstances that the church needed eliminated. The specific killing of a being associated with the church's highest ideals required a specific kind of burial, and Brador provided that burial by locking himself away. He asked the church to keep him imprisoned. He asked them specifically to give him the key so he can never leave. The church complies, and then he invades the player repeatedly in the DLC, because his duty to the church's secrets does not end with his imprisonment, and the hunter who has followed the path through the research hall and into the fishing hamlet is someone Brador has been authorized to stop. He is imprisoned to prevent himself from speaking. He kills to prevent others from knowing. And in the specific tragedy of a person who has devoted themselves so completely to institutional loyalty that they accepted their own cage as a righteous act, he does not question any of it. His equipment drops when you kill him in the nightmare. His cell key, which you find in the research hall, is the key he asked the church to use to lock him in. Fact 83. The enlarged head patients in the research hall, the enormous detached heads that float or crawl through the halls, do not die permanently. They respawn. Their item description explains that imbibing brain fluid in excess caused the patient's heads to expand until that was all that they were. The respawning is not simply a game mechanic. In the context of the research hall's lore, it represents something specific. These patients have undergone a transformation that the ordinary cycle of death and return applies to them differently than it does to ordinary humans. Their bodies are gone, consumed by the expansion of their heads, which have grown to accommodate the brain fluid they were given until only the head remained. The respawn implies a persistence that ordinary death does not terminate. They speak when the hunter interacts with them, in the distorted, inhuman voices of entities that are no longer entirely human, and they say things, fragments of the language they retain from before the transformation, filtered through whatever their consciousness has become in the enlarged head state. They are not mindless. They are different. One of them, on the upper levels, holds a brain fluid that the quest line requires. The hunter must attack the patient to obtain it. The patient respawns. There is no completion here, no resolution where the patient is freed or the process reversed. There is only the taking of what is needed from something that cannot stop the taking and cannot permanently be destroyed. Fact 84. Clock tower patients in the research hall who have gone past the enlargement stage and into the worm-like form represent an even further stage of the ascension experiment, and some of them are still capable of movement and aggression. Said the progression of the research hall's patients is visible through the environment. From the mobile, violent patients on the upper floors to the enlarged head patients who can no longer move but can still speak, to the worm-like forms at the lowest levels who are something past the head stage. The worm forms shoot tendrils from their faces, a different kind of reach than hands, a different kind of sensing than eyes. The specific direction this transformation takes, towards something aquatic, something tentacular, something that has moved past the categories of face and limb into a form associated with deep water and cosmic depth, is consistent with the research hall's founding theory. The early church believed the great ones were linked to the sea, and the experiments were designed to produce a form that could hear the howl of the sea that the great ones inhabit. Whether any patient successfully completed this journey, whether any of them arrived at the kind of kin ascension that Adeline achieved in a specific way, is not confirmed for the worm forms. They are the most extreme version of the experiment that is still visibly present. What the experiment looks like when it succeeds is the celestial emissary in the upper cathedral ward, and the worm forms are the version that did not quite make it. Fact 85. There is a clock tower patient in the research hall who is calling for Lady Maria. They cannot see. They reach toward where she was. She is not there. On the upper balcony of the research hall, accessible through the area's traversal, a passive patient, one of the ones who has not yet become violent, who can still perform something resembling human behavior, is reaching outward and calling Maria's name in a distorted, barely intelligible voice. Maria administered the experiments here. She cared for the patients in the specific way of someone who understood what was being done to them and chose to be present for it anyway, because she could not undo it, and she could at least be there. She gave Adeline the key to the balcony. She spoke to the patients. She was, in the specific way that Bloodborne reserves for its most human moments, trying to be a decent person inside an indecent institution. She is gone. The patient who calls for her has no way of knowing why she stopped coming. The patient calls into the empty air of a space that has been abandoned by everyone who administered it, in the nightmare where time has passed and things have changed, and the person who was kind to them is somewhere else, being punished for her part in something she did not fully choose. Fact 86. The item Brado drops when killed, his set and the bloodletter weapon, connects him to Ludwig in a specific way that the game never makes explicit through dialogue. The bloodletter is a weapon whose item description associates it with the concept of using one's own blood as an external force, breaking through the body to weaponize what flows within. In law terms, the Church's specific tradition of blood weaponry is associated with Cainhurst and the Vile Bloods, not with the Church's own hunters. Brador's use of this weapon, and the specific form of combat it represents, suggests a connection to the tradition that the Church officially condemned. The precise nature of what Brador did to Ludwig, and why the Church needed it covered up, involves details that the game provides only through inference rather than statement. What is established? Ludwig is in the nightmare, his identity suppressed, and his form monstrous. Brador is imprisoned for something involving Ludwig. The bloodletter is the weapon of a hunter who weaponized their own blood. These three facts, placed adjacent to each other, suggest something the game does not say directly, that what was done to Ludwig and how it was done involved the kind of blood magic that the Church maintained officially did not belong to it. Fact 87. The note that directs the hunter to find pale blood at the beginning of the game is not the only note written in the hunter's handwriting. There are others elsewhere in Yharnam, and each one suggests the hunter has been through specific parts of this journey before. The opening note at Iosefka's clinic establishes the convention. Other notes found in the game world, directions to specific locations, warnings about specific dangers, observations about the specific nature of what the hunt is, share the same voice as the hunter, not literally the same handwriting in a mechanical sense, but the same perspective, the same knowledge level, the same specific awareness of what lies ahead. The implications accumulate across playthroughs. The hunter who reads these notes on their first experience of Yharnam is reading instructions left by themselves from a previous cycle. The knowledge encoded in the notes is the specific knowledge that only comes from having been through the relevant areas, knowing what is dangerous, knowing where to go. Someone had to acquire that knowledge. That someone was the same person who is now reading the notes for what their current memory registers as the first time. The hunter's nightmare, the cycle of dying and returning, the note written in their own hand. These are all aspects of the same truth. This night has happened before. Shah fact 88. Ludwig's holy moonlight sword emits light not because it has been enchanted, but because it has become a trick weapon with specific physical properties that the moonlight amplifies. The holy moonlight sword is described as Ludwig's discovery during his time in the Pthumerian labyrinths, a weapon he found rather than built, whose nature was always present, and whose light was not added to it, but was part of what it was. The moonlight that amplifies it is not divine blessing in the conventional religious sense. It is the specific resonance between the weapon's material composition and the specific quality of moonlight, the light of the moon presence, the pale blue light associated with the Great One that governs the hunt. The weapon reflects what the moon represents in Bloodborne's cosmology, and the moon presence is associated with pale light, with the blood that connects the hunt to the cosmos, with the specific quality of what it means to exist at the boundary between the human world and the Great One's domain. A sword that shines with moonlight is a sword that carries the moon presence's influence in its material structure, not as a blessing, but as a property. Ludwig found it in the depths of the labyrinths and believed he had found something sacred. He was not wrong, but what he found was sacred in a way that the Healing Church's specific theology could not fully account for. Fact 89. The Healing Church Workshop and its affiliated hunter organizations were all formally dissolved at some point before the events of the game. Every institutional structure the game refers to, Byrgenwerth, the old hunters, the church workshop, the choir, the school of Mensis, existed in the past. The night of the hunt is the last night of the last cycle. This is one of the most important pieces of structural lore in the game. There are no functioning institutions in Bloodborne. There are remnants of institutions. Eileen's covenant still has a purpose and she still fulfills it, but the formal structure is gone. Alfred hunts vile bloods, but the executioners as an organization are gone. The Healing Church exists as buildings and scattered survivors, but as an organized body it has collapsed. The hunt is happening on the night when everything that was built to manage what the hunt requires has already failed or been disbanded. The hunter is not working within a functioning system. They are moving through the ruins of every system that existed to produce the situation they are navigating. What looks like a city is a collection of institutions that have already ended, staffed by the people who were not gone when the ending came. Fact 90. The Lumen Flower Garden in the Upper Cathedral Ward, the garden of luminous flowers maintained above the research spaces where the choir worked, is a direct connection between the choir's research and the specific plants associated with Great One proximity. Lumen flowers appear in the hunter's dream as ambient decoration. They appear in the research hall's vicinity. They are connected, through item descriptions, to the phantasms, the small invertebrate creatures that serve as conduits to the cosmos, that allow Great One contact in ways that do not require blood. The choir grew these flowers because the choir's research was oriented toward cosmic contact through a different path than the blood, a path associated with light, with the specific quality of what grows toward the Great Ones, rather than what absorbs their blood. The Lumen Flower Garden is the physical manifestation of an alternative to the blood ministry, a form of ascension rooted in growth rather than consumption. Whether this alternative was viable, whether the choir's path would have produced something different from the blood ministry's results, is not answered because the institutions are all gone by the time the hunter arrives. The garden grows. No one is tending it. What it was building toward was abandoned when everything else was abandoned. Fact 91. Gehrman tends the flowers in the hunter's dream. He has been tending them for as long as the dream has existed. He is a craftsman who built weapons, a hunter who trained others, a prisoner who has made peace with his garden. And the flowers he tends are lumen flowers, The dream's aesthetic, the calm, the garden, the gentle quality of the space before the violence of the hunt begins each time, is Gehrman's. It was shaped by his hopes and his desires, as all nightmare spaces are shaped by their anchors. He wanted a workshop. He wanted a place of practice and craft. He got that. And surrounded by the craft space he wanted, in a garden of flowers he tends, he also got the specific irony of having what he made available to others, but not to himself. He cannot leave. The garden is beautiful. The flowers are the specific flowers associated with Great One proximity and cosmic contact. And Gehrman, the first hunter, tends them every day in the space that the moon presence built around his memory and his longing, because there is nothing else to do, and the flowers need tending, and he has been doing this for longer than he can remember. When you end his suffering, either by accepting release from him and allowing him to pass on, or by fighting him and taking his place, the dream continues. The flowers continue to grow. Someone else will tend them now. Fact 92. The moon presence has a second name, Flora. This is revealed in the Japanese version of the game, where the moon presence is called Flora, the moon demon. This name is never mentioned in the English release. Flora, the Latin word for flowering plants. The moon presence, the entity that built the hunter's dream, that has been seeking a surrogate child across the entire length of the game, that created the cycle the hunter moves through, is named after the specific class of living things that Gehrman tends in the garden it built around him. The lumen flowers in the hunter's dream, the flowers that grow in the garden of a prison, built for the being who serves as the moon presence's most intimate connection to humanity. Named Flora. The flowers Gehrman tends are, in the most specific cosmological sense, the flowers of the being that trapped him. The garden of his prison is named for the jailer. Whether this was intentional on the moon presence's part, whether it built the dream with this specific layer of meaning present, is not something the game can answer. What it establishes is that the association between the moon presence and flowers, between Flora and the lumen flowers and the garden of Gehrman's eternal caretaking, is not accidental. It is the name of the thing that built the cage, growing in the cage. Fact 93. The hunter's 3 possible endings represent 3 different relationships to what the Great Ones want, and only one of them gives the hunter what they came to Yharnam seeking in the first place. The hunter came seeking pale blood, to transcend the hunt, to escape whatever condition brought them to Yharnam in search of blood healing. The ending where Gehrman offers release, where you accept and wake under the morning sun, is the ending where you actually achieve what you came for. You are free. You leave the dream. Whatever brought you to Yharnam has, in some sense, been addressed by the night you survived. The ending where you fight the moon presence and transform into an infant Great One gives you something more than you came for, but not what you came for. You do not wake under the sun. You do not return to whatever life preceded the contract. You become something that is no longer human in the ways that made returning home possible. It is transcendence, but it is not freedom. It is a different kind of captivity, smaller, different, with the potential for something that the doll says has begun, but without the ordinary human continuation that waking up would have allowed. The ending where you simply accept release is the only one where the hunter gets what they asked for at Yosefka's clinic. Pale blood, transcendence of the hunt, the peaceful morning after a terrible night. Fact 94. The doll's final words, if you achieve the transformation ending. Oh, good hunter, I'm so glad. You've done it. Are not about the moon presence being defeated. They are about the hunter having become what the dream was always building toward. The doll tends the hunter throughout the game. She levels them up. She speaks to them in the specific, gentle voice of someone whose purpose is care. She maintains the dream's operational warmth through every death and return. She does not advocate for any ending. She does not push the hunter toward the moon presence fight or away from Gehrman's release. She is simply present, doing what she was made to do. When the transformation happens, when the hunter becomes the infant great one, and the doll gently lifts the small creature, her words are relief. I'm so glad. Not triumph, not explanation. The specific relief of someone who has been waiting for something for a very long time and has finally seen it arrive. Whether she is glad because the hunter achieved something meaningful, or because the moon presence found its surrogate and her function in the dream can shift to whatever comes next, is the final question the game leaves open. The doll tends what she was given to tend. She is glad the tending produced something. What that something means, whether it is good, whether it is terrible, whether the distinction matters, she does not say. Fact 95. The hunter is not the first person to follow this path. The graves in the hunter's dream are not decorative. Each one marks a hunter who came before you, who went through some version of this night, whose cycle ended in the specific way that graves mark. The cemetery of dreams, the graveyard visible from Gehrman's workshop in the hunter's dream, is real. These are the hunters who died in the dream, not in Yharnam, who expired within the cycle itself, whose existence as hunters came to an end in the space that should have protected them. They are not documented. They are not named. They are the unnamed accumulation of everyone who came before the hunter who is now moving through their world. The gravestones in the dream establish that this cycle has ended for many people in many ways. The hunter is not unique in having reached the dream. They are simply the current one. The one whose specific night this story is about. Among all the nights that have happened in this dream and all the hunters who have moved through it. When you achieve any ending, you are achieving it within a context of enormous previous failure. The graves are the evidence of that context. They are not threatening. They are simply present, as evidence is simply present, marking what was there without requiring acknowledgement from what is there now. Fact 96. Every great one in Bloodborne is associated with a specific academic discipline or field of human inquiry. Ueden with sound and language, the moon presence with light and growth, Ebritas with astronomy, Mergo with reproduction and inheritance, Amygdalae with psychology. This is not coincidental. The great ones in Bloodborne's cosmology are not simply cosmic monsters. They are the specific forms that human intellectual traditions take when they are pushed to their ultimate limit. When the study of sound reaches the being that exists as pure voice. When the study of growth reaches the being that flowers. when the study of psychology reaches the being that induces fear through sight. Byrgenwerth's project to understand the Great Ones and to become more like them was, in this reading, the project of pushing human knowledge into the cosmic territory where the specific thing being studied has already arrived. The scholars who pursued understanding of the Great Ones were not studying alien beings. They were studying what their own disciplines were pointing toward. Whether this means the Great Ones are projections of human knowledge taken to its limit, or whether it means human knowledge is simply the attempt of beings with limited perception to understand entities that exceed them, is one of the questions Bloodborne leaves open in the specific way that makes it impossible to stop thinking about. Fact 97. The specific horror Lovecraft explored, that the universe is indifferent and incomprehensible, that humanity is cosmically insignificant, is present in Bloodborne, but modified. Bloodborne's Great Ones are not indifferent. They grieve. Lovecraft's cosmic horror is built on the premise that the universe does not care about human beings. The ancient entities in his work are simply too large, too alien, too beyond human scale to register humanity as significant. The horror is the absence of relationship, the cold indifference of something that cannot even notice you. Bloodborne's Great Ones are different. They lose their children. They seek surrogates. They respond to prayers. They curse those who harm what they love. Kos responds to the fishing hamlet's suffering. The moon presence created an entire dream space in pursuit of a connection it needs. Murgo's cries sustain a nightmare. The wet nurse tends what she was given to tend. These are not indifferent entities. They are beings of immense capacity for feeling who have been repeatedly bereaved, who have arranged entire civilizations around the specific grief of their losses, and who interact with humanity, not with cold indifference, but with the specific intensity of beings who need something from the small creatures who can serve as surrogates for what they cannot keep. The horror of Bloodborne is not that the universe does not care. It is that the universe cares very much in ways that are incomprehensible and overwhelming, and that treat human lives as means to ends that humans cannot consent to, because the scale of what cares is so much larger than the scale of what is cared about. Fact 98. The hunters progress through the game, Iosefka's clinic, Central Yharnam, Cathedral Ward, the Forbidden Depths, the Nightmare, is a descent. Not in terms of geography, which goes both up and down. In terms of truth, each region contains a deeper layer of what is actually happening than the one before it. Central Yharnam presents the hunt as what it appears to be. Hunters managing a beast plague, a city under siege by the transformation its own blood has produced. The Cathedral Ward adds the church, the institution that administers the blood, with its own internal divisions and its specific relationship to what it manages. Old Yharnam adds history, the burn, the sealed-off past, Jura's witness. The Forbidden Woods add the secret, the path to Byrgenwerth, the source of everything. Byrgenwerth adds the original catastrophe, what Willem was seeking, what Lawrence betrayed, what the Great Ones actually are. Add the nightmares, add the cosmic scale, the truth that the physical world is operating within a context set by beings whose purposes are illegible to the beings they affect. By the time the hunter reaches the moon presence, They have descended through every level of concealment to the thing that was always there, that the city and the church and the institutions and the hunt were all at different levels of awareness, organized around. The game is structured as the progressive removal of every screen between the hunter and the specific terrible truth of the world they came to for healing. Fact 99. The final question Bloodborne asks is not about the great ones. It is about what it means to be a witness. Every significant NPC in the game is a witness to something, to the fishing hamlet massacre, and to the first linking of the blood, to the specific catastrophe that their particular portion of the story represents. The hunters who went blood-drunk and are in the nightmare are witnesses to their own dissolution. Gehrman is a witness to everything that happened in the dream since its beginning. Master Willem is a witness who can no longer communicate what he saw. Maria is a witness who is guarding the secret of what she witnessed. What the hunter does over the course of the game is become a witness to the full story. They accumulate the truth that every institution in Yharnam was organized to prevent from being fully assembled in one place, in one consciousness that could understand it as a whole. And then, at the end, they make a choice about what to do with that witnessing. Link themselves to the flame, to the cycle, and to the continuation of the hunt. Transform into a great one, becoming part of what they witnessed rather than remaining a witness to it. Or wake up, taking what they now know back to a world that does not have it. Being a witness who survived the witnessing and went home. The game does not tell you which of these is correct. It offers them all. The witness decides. Fact 100. Bloodborne is ultimately a game about what happens when small beings reach toward things too large for them, and discover that the things too large for them were already reaching back. Every catastrophe in the game's history comes from this. Byrgenwerth scholars seeking the eyes of the gods. Lawrence distributing the blood of cosmic beings to an entire city. Mikolash trying to contact Murgo with a single umbilical cord. Gehrman accepting the moon presence's invitation. The fishing hamlet villagers worshipping a washed-up corpse. Each disaster is a version of the same story. Someone reached toward something immense, and the thing they reached toward responded in ways they could not predict or control or fully understand. The response of immense things to small reaching is not malice. The moon presence did not intend to trap Gehrman. It intended to find a surrogate child and built the only kind of space it knew how to build around the person it chose. Kos did not intend to curse the hunters. She was dead, and the curse came from her grief and the grief of those who loved her, expressing itself in the only form grief at that scale could take. The great ones reach because they need something. The humans reach because they need something. And the catastrophe is the collision of those needs in a space too small to accommodate them both. What survives the catastrophe, in the specific way that Bloodborne offers survival, is the individual who moved through all of it and maintained enough of themselves to be still present at the end, not unchanged. No one who goes through Yharnam is unchanged, not victorious. The game does not offer victory in any conventional sense, simply still there, still capable of choice, still a witness who can decide what to do with what they have seen. This is the game's final gift, Not an answer, but a position. You have seen everything. You are still here. What you do next is yours to choose. This has been 100 unusual Bloodborne facts, told slowly from the beginning. Up for the nights when sleep is far and the dark outside feels close and large. The hunt is over. The night has passed. Good night, good hunter. Rest now.